Dear friends and colleagues, my name is Peter Weibel. I'm the director of ZKM, the Center of Art and Media in Karlsruhe. I have the pleasure and the privilege to welcome you for a two-day symposium with the title Institutions and Resistance, Alliances for Art at Risk. I especially welcome Marita Muukkonen and Ivor Stodolsky, the co-directors of the organization Artists at Risk, with whom we have organized the ZKM and this organization Artists at Risk this two-day symposium. Imagine you're a tourist and traveling to Spain or Italy, and at the border you're told, and even warned, that you're not allowed to make political statements in public. Otherwise, it could happen that you will be imprisoned. Can you imagine such a situation, that a tourist, you are not allowed to speak with your friends and your colleagues in a coffee shop or at the beach about politics? Even worse, you're even warned that you are surveyed. And even when you speak in the private space, in your hotel rooms, etc., you're surveyed. And it could happen that your discussion about the political situation in the country you just have arrived as a tourist is critical and judged by the government as dangerous. Precisely this situation exists at the moment in China, where sport people are warned not to speak about politics, privately or public. And these situations happens even more and more radical and dangerous in the art world, in many countries in the world. Can you imagine? Where would you go if the world would fall apart? What if your colleagues in museums were hijacked? Your friends or colleagues were hunted or killed? An incredible situation. I think 3 books have already described in the past century our present situation. One book is called Wasteland, The Wasteland, published 1922 by T.S. Eliot, who won later a Nobel Prize for this book. And today, the global planet, our planet, planet Earth, is a wasteland. We suffer an enormous eco crisis. Another book was published in 1947 by Winston Auden, called Age of Anxiety. We live in an apocalyptic time of anxiety. And the third book was called by Horkheimer, called The Eclipse of Reason. This is the situation today. We are living in an age of anxiety on a based planet and suffer from an eclipse of reason. I think when we see that artists take risks to defend freedom, democracy, human universal values, our obligation, I say precisely our obligation, is to minimize this risk for artists. And how can we do this? I think by a culture of care and repair, by a culture of resistance and resilience, by a culture of support. We come together today and also tomorrow to see how can we actually organize and finance this new culture which is necessary. Because if we do not defend these artists who take risks to defend human universal values, then these values will collapse. So when we support these artists and secure these artists in their work, then we too defend democracy, freedom, universal human values. Therefore, I think today it is the most important thing for art institutions not only to discuss art, but precisely to do this what the governments in the world don't want, to discuss politics. And we have the enormous privilege that theoreticians and activists and artists who have thought about this problem for many times and suffered many times this crisis will help us to understand the situation. And even when the situation is extremely risky and violent, we will end with a lecture which gives us more hope. And we are all very, very grateful that the world best-selling author, David Wengrow, professor of comparative archaeology, who wrote the book The Dawn of Everything together with David Graeber. David Graeber, unfortunately, died recently. And David Wengrow took his time to share with us his knowledge. Because in this book, Dawn of Everything, Graeber and Wengrow show us that the history of the world could have been different. And when the history of the world could have been different, it also demonstrates that it can be still in future be different. Therefore, he says, everything is still possible in future. Therefore, the title, Dawn of Everything. Thank you that you participate in the symposium, because this is, I think, the most important thing what institutions can make today, to minimize the risks of people who risk their life for our common human universal values.
First of all, our warm thanks to Dr. Peter Weibel for the opening words and raising all those relevant questions which will be discussed in the symposium Institutions and Resistance Alliances for Artists at Risk during today and tomorrow. My name is Marita Muukkonen, and I'm a co-founding director of Artists at Risk, which is the co-organizer of this two-day symposium. I have a pleasure to chair this first section of the symposium, Threats and Risks, today together with the co-founding director of Artists at Risk, Ivor Stodolsky. Next, we wish to shortly introduce to you Artists at Risk, which we refer to AR when we speak about it, and explain how and why we are here at the ZKM Center for Art and Media Karlsruhe today. Artists at Risk grew out of our work. It is a work of Perpetuum Mobile, who later started Artists at Risk with dissident artists in Russia, and later we started a project called Reliant Art, and we worked and did curatorial research with dissident artists in Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. And out of that grew another project called Reliant Art, because as you remember, there was a wave of revolutions which started from Tunis in 2010, the Jasmine Revolution. And I think we all witnessed via social media and media what happened in Egypt, in Tahrir Square. And actually tomorrow, the 12th of February, that's the day when Hosni Mubarak stepped down in Egypt. It was a historical moment when, for a very brief moment, it felt that another world is possible for people, for younger generation in Egypt. But very soon there was a backlash, and the situation got bad. It got even worse for people who were part of the square movement in Egypt and also elsewhere. As we know that this square movement, it spread fast. It's basically people gathered in Bolotnaya Square in Moscow, in Taksim Square in Istanbul. There was an Occupy movement in New York, Indignados in Spain, and so on. But especially in Northern Africa, and in Egypt, artists and activists who joined the square movement were repressed. And we were working with these people as curators. They were our peers, they were artists, they were activists, and they were in very difficult situation. President Sisi took power in 2014, and they were facing the situation that they had to get out. They needed a breather. And at the time we were working with artists in residencies in Helsinki, and we thought that we have to open these artists in residencies for people who need to get out for some time to figure out what's the next step. And one of the first artists we hosted was very well-known Egyptian street artist Ganser, who actually was also part of a global activism project here in ZKM in Karlsruhe. Ganser had a residency in Helsinki in 2013 when the situation was already getting more difficult for activist artists like him. He's a street artist who was most well known for his bread carrier and the tank street art piece. We will later on today see his very touching animation he made for the 10th anniversary of the Egyptian revolution last year in January 2021. After that, we started to develop its Artist at Risk to an institution, because to our surprise at that time, there was no institution which was really hosting art practitioners at risk. As we all know that this pen has been working for a long time with writers and journalists, but we were contacted by several peers, people we knew, such as photographer Issa Tuma from Syria, a colleague from Ukraine, Vasily Tserebanian, who was beaten up by right wing, and they all needed some kind of a break to get out from the difficult situation. And we started to develop Artists at Risk to an institution with an ongoing public call. And it started to develop as a peer institution. It's basically peers, institutions like ZKM or artist collectives. They said that we can also open our doors. We can host our colleagues, our artists who are in difficult situation, to show our solidarity in that moment. As Dr. Peter Weibel said, I mean, any one of us can be in that situation, and how would it feel if you just couldn't go back or you'd be censored all the time? And since 2013, Artists at Risk has hosted Artists at Risk residencies in 20 different cities in 16 different countries. And the first artist and curator, Baris Seyatvan, was here in Karlsruhe 3 years ago. And we will hear a statement by Baris tomorrow on Saturday in the section Institutions as Resistance.
And hello also from me. I'm Ivor Stodolsky, also co-founding director of Artists at Risk. We would now like to turn from the kind of historical origins and the peer-to-peer nature of our organizations to the purpose of this symposium as a whole. It's a 2-day symposium, as we've said, and we'd like to preface it with some general words on institutions and resistance, alliances for art at risk, and the possible alliances we could form during our turbulent and dangerous era. Firstly, though, we would like to again thank ZKM in Karlsruhe for proposing and co-organizing and co-producing and hosting this symposium. And we also plan, as it says in the program, to have a follow-on working session which will take place, we believe, in the future in spring in Berlin. And we hope to have some high-level political members giving, possibly from the German parliament or even ministerial level, to join us in understanding how we could create alliances. So this is the second major event which we are jointly holding as the EU Creative Europe funded Artists at Risk, a European network of safe havens, or ARNH network for short. So the first in the ARNH network project was called #Risk and Rebellion, which was a 7-hour live stream with 5 so-called chapters, which we created in Helsinki, which included artistic interventions, keynotes, panel discussions, and performances, as well as reports directly from the field of struggles. That is, we were actually live with people who were in the course of various uprisings in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Syria, in the thick of it, Iraq and Iran, and artists were joining us, and political figures from also Russia and Belarus, from Brazil, Mexico, from New York to Barcelona and Berlin. And it was also time to be the anniversary of the Egyptian revolution, as well as the 20th anniversary of the World Social Forum. And it happened to be that it was also the time of the Indian farmers' protest against the privatization of Indian agriculture. And we had reports directly from that by our AR Goa hosts, including Q, a filmmaker from India, who will be joining us also tomorrow, Saturday. We also had screened something from David Graeber, who Marita already mentioned, who's co-author of The Dawn of Everything, will be opening the third section on Saturday tomorrow. We also had Extinction Rebellion, which will join us again. And so today's symposium has certain similarities in structure, and it's part of the same larger EU funded project. And we will start this first section of our three in this symposium, again with a keynote, and we'll have an opening conversation in the second, and again a keynote in the third. And likewise, each section will include artistic interventions, a rich selection of panelists with statements, followed by discussions moderated by moderators that we have brought in, excellent, very interesting moderators in their own right. And furthermore, we'll pepper the ongoing symposium with numerous video statements, which we hope will provoke and enrich the debate. For those already who have joined the live stream already, we hope that you realize there's the chat, of course, in each of the live streams, that you can basically react to what is happening and ask questions. So these, it's being streamed via the YouTube of ZKM, and it's also AR's YouTube is also live, as well as AR's Facebook. So in any of these streams, you can easily just comment, and these comments will then be filtered by our team, and we will then pose them to the speakers and panelists in question. You can also use Artists at Risk's Telegram channel for that. Okay, now we'll just give a brief structure in overall so that you understand why we're doing it in three sections. So the first being is that there's the first section is called Threats and Risk, the one we are going to be moderating today, Marita and I. So the idea here today is to understand why are we, why we're in need of any kind of institutional resistance at all. I mean, what do we need this alliance for? What are the threats and what are the risks that we're facing as kind of from our position? Now, of course, we're not talking about any institutions. We're not talking about any kind of resistance. We're talking about resistance to authoritarian forms of power, to ecological destruction, to forms of fascism rising again. So we're talking about discriminatory, inegalitarian, and so on, all these kinds of threats that we will speak about in concrete terms that are taking place today in Afghanistan, obviously, under the Taliban, but just as much also in Belarus, to some extent in Russia, and of course in the MENA region, which Marita just spoke about at length. So this section is about the threats we face also as a planet in general. I mean, it will continue into the third section, that question. And which risks do artists and activists and even institutions take to resist these threats is a very important issue we'll address today too. So tomorrow we'll begin with section 2, which is institutions as resistance. And this will focus on institutions, existing networks, alliances, and experiences with examples of how institutions already today form like our resistant actors. How can we defend democratic art communities who are at risk? Well, we try to do that through institutions. We'll be hearing from those that are already practicing this kind of resistance. How can these alliances help individual actors, we'll be asking? And how can institutions even help other institutions, let's say in Hungary, in Poland, even in Afghanistan? And we'll be having actually the director of the Contemporary Art Center of Afghanistan with us in that panel. So he'll be in section 3. Future scenarios and alliances, the third section, will be kind of asking the bigger questions. It'll be just taking a step back. Okay, we've mapped the threats and risks. Now we've had a discussion about the current state of affairs. And the third section will be how can we imagine going forward? What kind of alliances could we build? And to do that, we need to first understand what kind of mental framework, ideological or even like historical framework are we imprisoned by that don't allow us to see possible alternatives? And for this, the keynote by David Wengrow, the co-author of the groundbreaking The Dawn of Everything, with David Graeber, our dear friend, who passed away so unexpectedly just after finishing the manuscript for this book, which is currently topping the bestseller list, but is a very important book in historical terms, I believe. It rewrites the history and the prehistory of human social organization and opens the imagination to future possibilities. So this panel will ask the big questions, but then also get down to very concrete, practical questions of how do we build institutional alliances? So that gives you a general tripartite structure of the symposium.
And it's all of this is happening here in Karlsruhe. It's thanks to Dr. Peter Weibel, who actually invited its artists at risk to work with ZKM and basically ZKM to host art practitioners at risk. First Paris Yatvan, and also ZKM reacted very fast this autumn when the crisis in Afghanistan started and offered to host 2 art practitioners at risk here in Karlsruhe. It's basically the visa process in Germany is not progressing as wished, but we also will return to debate of this kind of obstacles later on. Our warm thanks go to Philipp Ziegler, who has really encouraged us in our work and basically connected us to an amazing network here in Germany to actually support the work of artists at risk, and also getting visas, getting funding also in other cities in Germany for artists at risk. And great thanks to Teresa Rezza, who has tripled herself and worked non-stop in the preparations of this symposium. I think we have met each other on daily basis for during last month in Zoom. So it's great to be in person here in Karlsruhe and meet everybody. Thanks to Daria Shibitsina and other people who have been working with the press and communications here at ZKM. And of course, to the video studio, who is here with us also today, and to everybody behind the scenes here at ZKM.
And we'd also, of course, like to thank our colleagues, the staff at Artists at Risk. So a big warm thank you goes out to Han Nguyen, who is our assistant in communications in Helsinki. Wonderful, wonderful thank you to you, Ha. Our tech team and our communications and admin team, which is also with us online today. So then we would like to also thank our other partners in AREng, the EU network. So we're especially happy that for the first time since the new European network of AR Safe Havens was launched in the Risk and Rebellion Symposium, we've had the opportunity to have all of almost all of our network partners with us today in person. Art Veda Tunis, we hope that Ahmed Kanfir will be able to arrive, and that's a saga in itself, and it shows you just how hard, even for established institutional leaders from the North African region, to gain visa access to the Schengen area. He's struggling to get onto a flight after having waited far too long for a visa, and it was issued at the very last moment. We hope that he can make it. Then we would like to thank also the CCCB in Barcelona, a very, very prominent institution on a European scale, an excellent partner. We just had a seminar there with, interview there with Masha Aljochina, who was meant to be our keynote speaker in section 1 today. We'll get back to that. And they have kindly let us use their footage from the recent event with her. And then we would like to also welcome to our network Frame, or Frame if you like in English, which is a very interesting organization based in Marseille, a large-scale exhibition space, a residency organization, and they're based in the La Friche de Belle de Mai, and we are very proudly hosting with them already the first artist, and we're hoping that they will also join officially the AREng network, although that still remains something to be decided. We are looking forward to working with them in any case on Afghan artists, which we have already put on the evacuation list. Lastly, I think we should also mention that we would like to thank those who are in the audience for joining us. here in the live stream. And later in GatherTown, you'll hear a bit more about GatherTown. It's a virtual space, which you'll learn about in a separate little segment. And in the coming months, when we do the follow-on event in Berlin, the working session, the institutions that are joining us today, that they will be given a voice in that forum. So thank you for joining us for Alliances for Art at Risk. So now, Laura, would you please, could you introduce GatherTown to us? There's a short segment about that.